Hello and welcome to another Blender tutorial brought to you by the Lowest Art. My name is Emmanuel Kafo and I hope you guys are having a wonderful weekend. In this Blender tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to rig and set up a dynamic piano. So I've been working on a personal project trying to recreate a fan art of the Soul animated movie by Disney, and part of it was to create a piano scene. So instead of hand animating every single key, I had to figure out a way to set it up so it can work dynamically for all the fingers, and it's quite stable and works over time. So I want to share with you guys, since I've not released it yet, so I'll just use this as a filler till that is out. So this is what we'll be trying to create today. Not the whole piano, but I'll just kind of show you guys how to set it up. Okay, so let's check out the scene. So this is the piano we're looking at, and the great thing is that you can have a relatively real-time feedback. So, and the rig also allows you to enable and disable dynamics. So currently the dynamics is turned on. I can turn it off, and then we have ability to use the rig and animate it ourselves if we want. But if you don't want if you want it to be dynamically animated, then you turn on the dynamics, and it works with any object. So I can just add a UV sphere, scale it up, add dynamic paint, make this a brush, and add the brush, and then I play. I'll kind of hide this, so as you can see, it just works. And it's quite great because I don't need to add like little sphere in the fingers to be able to trigger it. Even the fingers of the character itself can trigger it. Okay, so let's start up now. I've set up a scene that we'll be working on. It's a more similar piano. So before we start up, I want us to understand the problem we're trying to solve with the situation, because it'd be a very good way to really understand how this works. So a basic example is using this setup for a simple button. So this button, let's say, so we already know this problem we're trying to solve is to be able to press this button down, and we want it to automatically come back up after a while, and that's basically it. And we want it to be based on proximity, so only when the object comes close to it, then we can see that effect. The basic way we want to do it is using a combination of armature, and since Blender Armature don't really have a way to use proximity to trigger stuff, if it exists I don't know, but we'll start by adding the armature. So I'm just gonna select this and go to object and Shift S, basically cursor to selected, and I will add a single bone. Okay, and then this single bone, just for visibility, I'm going to turn in front, and I will go here and make it wired. Okay, and then I'll put the pivot point at the end of the piano, and then just make it lay down. But better still, I could just rotate it x 90 degrees. Selection to cursor, and I can just snap it. It doesn't have to really be perfect, as long as it's just roughly there. So if it's like a button, you probably want to do it the opposite direction, where it's facing this position, but like for the key, this is how it's going to go. So we want this object to be parented to this armature. So when we're dealing with like single objects like this, it's as easy as selecting this, shift selecting this, and going to pose mode and select the bone in pose mode and do Ctrl P to bone. But for some situation which makes the scene more simple, that you have all the keys combined, it's probably better to use weight paint for that situation. I'll just turn it on my screen cascade. So let's just do that. So I'm going to select the object, shift select the bone, Ctrl P with empty group. So this basically adds the armature modifier, but it doesn't assign any group to it. So it allows us to do it by ourselves. So we can select the rig, shift select the object, and go here and switch to weight paint mode. So we can now start painting, but the quick way to just apply or flood it to this object is to go into edit mode, select everything. So once you select a bone in the weight paint, it automatically is selected here in the vertex group, so you can just hit assign and it has flooded it and we have it parented. Okay, so now we can have the keys moving up and down, but it's going to be tedious for us to rotate it anytime, especially for what we're trying to do. Adding a system that will trigger it is basically we want the system to trigger it to go down. So for that system, we need to add a constraint, an IK constraint. So basically, I'm going to add like the IK controller. So if you hold down Shift after selecting the IK controller and Shift select this bone, if you hit Shift I, you're going to go to active bone. Then you can come here in constraint and set it to 1 chain length because we just want it to affect 1 bone. So now if we move this up and down, we can see it's connected to it. So another thing we want is to prevent it from moving past a certain location. So it's kind of behave like a real keyboard. It cannot go past a certain extent. So to set that up, we'll also be using constraint. So for the constraint, we'll be using a limit location constraint. That's basically what we're trying to limit. Okay, so we need to determine how much distance we want for it to reach before we limit it. So if you come to this item, you can find this transformation, and if we move this downwards, you can see how much distance it's going. So depending on the design of your keyboard or depending on how much you want it to extend to, you can kind of push it. So let's say 0.24 is something okay, so we can lock everything and it's saying negative 0.24. So here we'll do negative 0.24. Okay, and then we'll have to say that set this to local space. So now it cannot move in any other axis except the y-axis, and then it has a limit constraint that prevents it from going to a certain extent, which is exactly what we want. So basically we've set up the basic keyboard, moving the keys. The next stage is to create a dynamic constraint based on proximity, whereby if it comes close to it, then it triggers the motion of it going up and down. So for that, we need our the timeline keyframe. We'll just switch this. Basically switching with shortcuts, but you can come here and switch this to timeline. So you want to make sure your the keyframe is in frame 1. Okay, so now for us to create dynamics basic system we're using is called Dynamics Paint because it allows for proximity triggers. So we need to add a cube that will add as a driver for it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a simple cube. So the cube can be located here, but it's wise to set it very close to the individual bone. So like this is the bone we're trying to control, and then we have to place the cube right here. Just roughly there, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so once you have your cube there, we want to tell this cube to control this particular IK bone that is moving this up. So it's kind of like a driver in object mode. So for us to do that, we need another constraint. Another constraint is called the copy location constraint. And this constraint makes object copy the location of another object. So the target is going to be this cube, and we can see it snap there. So now if we move this, it's working quite well. So but we want it, the vertex group to be a factor in this. So we can see here it gives us like the ability to add vertex group. So we want to add all this cube as a vertex group. So we'll do add vertex group and assign this. So if I select, it's all selected, and basically we just want to assign it here. So this is the base setup. Another one thing is currently if we move this cube downwards, we can see it overextends the constraint we've put for it. So we needed to respect that particular constraint we set up. And the way to do that is basically switching the hierarchy. So Blender constraint as the modifier works in constraint in hierarchy. So the one that's first is being respected by the one in the bottom, so everything kind of work together with each other. So now if we move this, we can see that the keyboard the key stop in a certain extent and cannot extend beyond that, and it cannot go in any other direction than downwards. Okay, so I'm just gonna apply the alt transform to data. So when I press Alt G, it comes back here. So once you have the setup, what's left is basically adding dynamics. So any dynamic that we apply to this bone to trigger its motion, it's going to influence the rig. So for that, we'll come to dynamic paint, make this a canvas, add canvas. So usually I'll set this to 1000. So I don't plan to animate up to a frame of 1000, but since it's kind of meant to be a procedural rig, I'm going to just make it go as long as possible, and when I'm baking it, I can just bake it to a certain extent and then cancel it once it's reached the animation frame which I want, which I will show you guys in a bit. Okay, and so that's that for that the length of the simulation. And then we come to the surface. For the surface type, we'll select displacement. Okay, for the mass displacement factor, you can just go crazy with this. It's not really important. You just want to get as much effect, as much trigger, as much movement as possible. So we're going to make this 5. For the radius, you can just increase this as much as possible. Okay, so that's that. You're done with the surface. So another important thing is the dissolve factor. If you notice from my example, we have the keyboard going down, and after a minute somewhere it comes back up, that's basically how buttons and keys of the piano react. So we want that. So we're going to use the dissolve to kind of simulate that. So we by default is set to slow. We want to uncheck that. We want that to be fast motion, and for the time we want to set it to 1 second. I don't know how the kind of scale for this, but I'm just going to set it to 1 because that's the lowest value it can go. So once you've done that, I think you're all set. You're good to go. So once you have your frame at frame 1, you can quickly preview your simulation. So I'll just add a cube and then add dynamic paint, set this as brush, add brush, and when I move this, we can see that the keys are moving. But this will not look pretty in any way. So I usually just put it away and everything will be fine. But we can see it's working, and it's based on proximity. So, but another problem you're running into now is if we move the cube like here and move it, nothing seems to be happening, and that's not what we want. We want it to be able to affect the area surface of the key. So for that, we'll just scale up this cube to roughly match the size of it. And since the displacement works with vertices, that's how it displaces the object, we need to add more subdivisions. So after you add the subdivision, it makes it easy for it to trigger. I'll just make this a bound object. It makes it trigger any location. So the more subdivisions you have, the more faster it will trigger. So for this brush type object, if I want it to react faster, so I'm just going to increase the distance to the highest value so it just works faster. So basically increasing this value, all these values will kind of speed it up. That's why I went for the mask value, just to trigger it faster. So now you have your keyboard working. So that's basically the whole gist of it. If you want to watch me rig the keys itself, because since you'll be kind of doing repetition of same task basically, though I already have a technique of kind of speeding, of making sure you don't have to repeat so much tasks. You can stick around. Basically, if you don't have time, this is basically the setup. But now what we'll be doing is to set up this keyboard and make it work. So let's start by organizing the scene. I'm going to move it into its new layer and call this piano, because we need to keep things neat since we're going to be dealing with lots of objects. So let's start by adding an armature for this, and just place it here. So exactly what we did earlier. So I'm going to make this wireframe. I'm going to make this in front and place it here. Just for it to look nice, I'm going to set it to a stick bone. Okay, so now we can duplicate this. But before we duplicate it, since it's kind of same thing we're going to be doing over and over, we need to kind of speed up the process. So I'm going to extrude this now. Clear the parent and add the inverse schematics now. I'll set it to chain of 1, and we also need like a parent bone where all of this will be parented to. So it will be parented to this particular bone, and I can go ahead and hide it. Okay, so now for the limit constraint, because we know that's what's next, we're going to limit the location, everything but the negative y-axis, and we're going to set this to negative 0.24. Okay, and we'll set this to local space. We'll probably have to change its value later, because when we bind it to the keys, we'll see how much we need for it to look nice. Okay, so once we've had this set up, we can just easily duplicate them and align it. But I forgot to do one important thing. So I'll also add the copy location now, so that we don't have to do it again. Yeah, so I'll just leave it as that. Set this to word space, so that's fine. I'm kind of trying to speed up the process so we don't have to repeat most things. So select this, duplicate, just duplicate all of this. And finally this. So we'll add a new bone here. Extrude this upwards and unparent it. I'll just parent this to this, and we can hide this. So for this, we'll copy the selected constraint of the copy location, which we already have, and we also want to do the invert kinematics. One, also forgot to copy the limits location. Okay, so we have the same setup, and we can now duplicate it. Okay, so once you've duplicated it, we basically don't need all of these bones again. So we can move it to a different collection, and that's that. So we have it working. We kind of need that though. So I'll also select this and move it to a different layer. So we have this. So I will do select Ctrl P, empty groups. And now we select the bone, shift select this, weight paint, and assign. So I'm going to pause the video and come back once I'm. So I'm done weight painting it. So we can see what we have now. We can move this. So like I told you, I kind of anticipated this. We'll probably have to customize this. So we don't have to do it all do them individually. We can just fix it as we need. So set this to 0. Let's see, -0.0, negative 0.05. So we'll probably need more. Let's do 0.1, 0.2. So let's do 0.15. Okay, so we can select all of this, probably this one included. Holding down Alt, your Alt key, you want to press negative 0.015. So if you're holding down Alt, it's going to apply it to all the bones. So for this, we'll probably need less, so negative 0.06. So we can select all of this, negative 0.06. Okay, so we are all set now. So we have our key working, and let's check if all of this are parented. Just move this. So we want this to be parented to this bone. Okay, so we have the basic setup now. So next is to add the dynamics. So for the dynamics, we also want a situation whereby we don't have to do so many tasks over and over again. So we'll add one cube. So we'll work on this cube to get it to be what we want. Also going to set it as wire and create a new collection and call these keys. So this will not be rendered. Once we're done with it, we'll close it. We'll hide it because we don't need it. Okay, so once we have this, we'll probably just have to set it up closer to the pivot point of the bone, and also we'll create a new vertex group and assign everything. So now we need to tell this to copy its location. So we already kind of predicted that. So assign the cube, assign the group. So now if we move this, it's working as expected. And if we add the dynamics, it's going to work as expected too. So let's add the dynamics. We'll add dynamic paint, canvas. Basically canvas is like the board and the brush is like the pen. So this is like the board. So canvas, set this to displace, set this to a very high value, infinity. We'll set this to the highest value so we can get the most quick, like good interaction quickly. The dissolve, like we said, will be 1 and it's set to be fast. And that's that. Okay, so we can duplicate this, but before we can probably duplicate it now, but before we do that, let's just test that it's working. Dynamic brush, add brush, volume proximity. So we can see it's working now. Don't mind the displacement, it's just doing its job. So we can see we can press the key. After we need it, it's gone. Okay, so now we can duplicate this and apply it to the rest. So I will just Shift D from top view, just place it randomly. Okay, and they're all inside the keys folder, so it's organized. We can repeat the same thing for the top. Let's make sure it's perfectly aligned. We'll add the subdivisions later. We just need to get it all set. Okay, so we are good. We can probably hide even this, so we'll move this to the first layer, and just have it as the controller. For all these cubes, which we could right click and do select objects, we'll parent it to this bone. So everything is connected. And now basically what we need to do is just assign the bones now. So you want to select, so to make it easy, I'm just going to hide all of this. So this is what we're just seeing, so we can use the eyedropper to more efficiently. So copy location and copy the vertex group, which is going to, so we can just search group. Oh sorry, we need to select the right bone, and then we have access to the group, the right object, sorry. So this is basically what I'm going to do for all of this, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay, so it's done now. I've filled up all the needed informations, and then we can add a UV sphere if we choose to, and dynamic paint, set this as brush, volume plus proximity, so we have our keyboard playing now. So like we did earlier, we definitely need more vertices for it to kind of have better influence and better touch. So for that, let's do that now. So I'm going to select everything and jump into edit mode and just move this. Make sure you're in transparent, so you can select both sides. I'll move this, so it's an accent. Okay, so we'll probably need this as reference. Okay, and we can just subdivide this. So the more subdivision, the better the touch will be. It can have more effect quickly. So we'll make the orientation of the pivot point to be in the right place by doing origin to geometry, and that's basically that. We can hide keys, and we'll have our object, and now we should have better touch. Don't let the dog out. Okay, so that's it, guys. I hope this was helpful. You could even go more advanced, not really advanced, basically adding drivers that will make it that can disable the simulation, which is it's very cool. I think it will be a nice tip to show you guys. So let's select this bone and create like a custom menu. So I'll select this bone. So in custom properties, I'll add a new custom properties, and we can see it created a property. So edit. So I'll call this disable dynamics. Okay, and I'll set this to 1. So it's kind of like a one. There's no in between value, so it's between 1 and 0. So kind of like an on and off switch. Then I'll right click and copy as new driver and come here. In the dynamics, I can paste the driver. So now this is going to turn it off anytime we don't want it. When it's 0, it's turned off, and when it's 1, it's turned on. Okay, so we can right click, select objects. We have to be in object mode, so we'll right click here, select object, and we want to make this the active object. So this will be the active object, and then we do Control L, link animation data, and what that does, it transfers all the driver information onto all the other objects. And once we're done, we can hide this, And basically we have a switch to turn off dynamics, because once you leave the first frame you probably will not be able to see the real-time feedback, but once you bake it then you see everything. So now we can do a quick test with a rough hand, which I have a rough hand asset, and allow me load it. Been a little buggy, doesn't load automatically for some reason, but let's find it again. Okay, so accept, and then it finds it. So just add this hand. So as long as it's a dynamic object set to brush, it just works. So something like this. So it feels like it's playing piano. And then we go to dynamics and set it to dynamic paint, brush, add brush, volume plus proximity. Volume will work, but I just want it to trigger faster. So we have a hand playing piano. We can have it just one finger affected, which is basically what you want. We can have both fingers as affected. So that's it, guys. I hope this was quite helpful. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give this video a like so that other Blender users can see this. I couldn't find one when I was looking for it, trying to figure this out. So you should just like it. It will help YouTube recommend it to more Blender users. And comment if you have any questions or any better suggestions. If you wish to see more from me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So bye bye for now. See you next time.